3, 2. Well, here we are, episode 2 of the Intergenerational album project. It's quite a mouthful, but it's a great title. They said we wouldn't make it to episode 2, but here we are, and we're back with David Bowie's Diamond Dogs from the year 1974. We're keeping it in the 70s. How are you doing today, Dad?
I'm doing great. And you know what? Listening to that opening bars of that song just makes me feel better. My head is bobbing.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, Rebel Rebel has that effect. That's the song we're playing off the album right now. I assume it's both our pick for the start of the album, but we're not going to get into that right now. We're going to get into that later. Let's just start. This is your pick this week for the album. Why don't you just give a little preamble, if you have one, on anything you want to do to introduce this one?
So I picked this one for a bunch of reasons. When I was in my prime music listening years, it was high school and college, and so call it 1977 to 1987 roughly. And Bowie at that time was really changing up his style, and he was, doing a lot of kind of new wave, and I knew that he had been more of a rock and roll icon, but the stuff in the 80s, to be honest, I didn't love very much. He did China Girl and Let's Dance, and to be honest, to me, he felt like a sellout. But I'd always known he had done these early career albums that were considered masterpieces. And so when I thought about, an album, listening to an artist's album as an album, Bowie seemed like a natural because I knew he was better than my memories of him from the 80s. So that's why I picked this one, and I think Diamond Dogs is, considered one of his better albums. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah, and just for me, I have no history. I think I mentioned this right at the end of last week's episode, but I have almost no history with David Bowie. Never really listened to an album. Certainly never listened to an album all the way through. But I know the big hits like Rebel Rebel, so I'm excited to get into this one. It's new territory for me. That's all I got to say on that.
I'm surprised that you even have heard some songs. That's great.
Yeah.
You've got some toehold on him anyway. That's good.
Yeah. Rebel Rebel, I couldn't have for sure told you it was a David Bowie song if you'd asked me last week. But I knew kind of it was his song. Certainly knew the song very well. So that's my history with David Bowie, as minimal as it is.
Nice.
Should we get into it?
Let's do it.
All right. Let's start with our first section here. Do you like this as an album or as a collection of songs? That's the distinction we're making.
I want you to go first on this one. I want to hear your thoughts on this first, because I have some thoughts that I think will screw up your thoughts.
Okay. Well, all right. I'll throw it to me then. I like this as an album. There's really nice blending of songs, like to transition from one song to the other, especially in kind of the early section. You've got song number 3 is Sweet Thing, then it goes to Candidate, and then to the Sweet Thing reprise. Especially those 3 songs blend together really nicely, and you kind of forget that you're transitioning between songs, which doesn't necessarily make something a cohesive album, but I find it's a really nice touch when you're sitting there listening through the whole thing. It just kind of all blends together. And also there's a really consistent sound. I think we talked about this with Teddy Pendergrass last week, that he almost hit that everything is consistent, but I find this album, even though there's kind of different thematic choices in the lyrics and whatnot, it's all a very consistent sound. It sounds like one studio session.
Yeah. So I think you're spot on about all of that. But I got to tell you, when I listened to this the first time, I didn't like it, either as an album or as a collection of songs. I just didn't like it. I found it kind of discordant. And there's some songs on here, too, in particular, that I knew from history, Diamond Dogs and Rebel Rebel. I didn't know any of the other songs, I don't think. And I just didn't like it. It just kind of felt bloated and ponderous and self-important. And so I didn't love it. And then I listened to it the second time and totally changed my mind. I think this is a really, really good album. I think it ties together some themes, and it feels like right from the opening, track, which is a spoken track, really, it feels like an invitation into a kind of a carnival theater of some kind. And I think a lot of the songs reflect that, and even the choice of using Diamond Dogs as a live cut on the second track kind of really evokes that whole come on into a live experience, but more of a theater than a concert. And the whole thing just kind of felt theatrical and really blends as an album for all the reasons you pointed out, and a few that I heard as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd have to agree with you on as a pure thumbs up or thumbs down. I'd probably go thumbs down on this one. There's some really great high points, but I agree with you. Some parts just goes on a little too long and indulges itself a little too much. So is this going to make it into my album rotation? Probably not. But there's some really great highlights on here, and as something that blends together, I give it the thumbs up there.
And I'm with you. At the end of the day, I think it's not an album that will make it into my rotation, but I'm really glad I listened to it twice.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, we should talk about that, actually. I've noticed you prefer to listen to these twice. I actually just like to listen to it one time and then give my thoughts on it, because I find that to be kind of the thrust of this challenge, is just sit down, listen to it one time. And I get you're listening to it two times, but maybe you can just explain that. That's because we got two kind of different philosophies on how to approach this.
So, great point, great question, and interesting you only listened to it once. And so you got to remember, when I was a teenager buying albums, there weren't a lot of other venues to listen to music. There was the radio, of course,
right.
But there was no Spotify. There was no way to pick songs from a vast, infinite library. You had your albums.
Right.
And so when you brought it home and unwrapped it, which was an awesome feeling, by the way, and you put it on for the first time, even if you didn't like it the first time, you were destined to listen to it again and again and again and again.
Right.
So to me, that's part of the experience of albums, is listening a number of times. And in both examples, Teddy last week and Bowie this week, I listening to it the second time made me like it a lot better. So that's why I think I'll take that approach. But it's interesting, it's part of the problem of your generation. If it doesn't grab your fancy right away.
Well, fair enough point. I'll take my lick there. But yeah, it's interesting. I don't think either one of us is wrong in our approach, but it's just kind of interesting. We get two different perspectives that way.
Big time.
But let's get back to David Bowie, the thrust of this episode. And did you have anything else to say on the album or collection of songs point before we move on?
Yeah, not really. Just overall, when you look at Bowie's whole discography, I think it's true of a lot of his albums. There's one or two songs that you will know, at least I would know, you probably wouldn't, but one or two really great singles. And then I suspect there's always one or two nuggets in there as well that you'd love. Get to by playing Bowie's top hits on Spotify or something. But as an album, I thought this worked like crazy. I'm just not sure it'd be in my regular rotation, as you say.
Yeah, true enough point. Let's move on to our second topic here. Does it hold up? The longevity question. Do you want to go first on this one?
Sure. No. It feels dated. It feels bloated in spots and self-important and self-indulgent in spots. And there's no question he's a talent. I'm assuming he's a lyricist. He can sing like crazy. And in fact, his voice gets better as it gets older on some of his later stuff. He's just a good singer. Mm-hmm. But it just feels dated to me. It feels like it's from an era when, rock acts were trying to be pageantry acts. And it just felt overly theatrical and overly self-important to me. It's kind of like that intellectual guy in the corner of a party that's waxing on about Nietzsche or Kafka or whatever the hell. And he's just kind of boring the shit out of everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, I have it written down. It's definitely aged in style. Yeah, for everything you mentioned, just the way songs are sung, the way it's all kind of arranged. But I will say it does hold up with its instrumentation. There's really great playing of instruments, and that wall of sound thing we talked about last week, where there's lots going on and it's a full sound. There, you get the classic rock instruments, your guitar and your drums. The drums are actually really great on this album, which is something I kind of picked out, a little nugget. And you've also kind of got brass sounds in the background in some of the songs, and there's lots of great different use of instrumentation. But I will agree with you that it is very aged in style.
It gets lush at times, doesn't it? Like
yes.
in the song 1984
Yes.
and When You Rock and Roll With Me, another track, it just sounds lush and full, and you can tell there's a chorus singing even if there isn't singing a chorus behind him. Not like a collection of people are singing their throats out, even when they're not. It's just that rich and lush. I agree.
Yeah. Anything else for the hold up question? I think that was pretty straightforward.
I'm ready to move on.
Diamond Dogs goes. Let's talk about songs we were notable. Not necessarily songs we liked, but songs that caught our ear. I'll start. Rebel Rebel. We talked about it already, but this is the hit of the song. If you go on Spotify, everything else is hovering around 2 million plays or so, and Rebel Rebel is up around 200 million. So I think the numbers speak for itself, and Rebel Rebel to me is just purely the star of the album, and nothing else really comes close for me.
I agree completely that Rebel Rebel is head and shoulders above the other tracks on this. And man, if you don't get on your feet when this thing starts playing, you're not alive. Like, it's just impossible to not bob your head and snap your fingers to this one. It's a good song.
Yeah.
The other song I liked a lot was Diamond Dogs, which you don't know, but has been a popular song. It was one I was certainly familiar with. But the undiscovered nugget that I'd like you to play a little bit of is When You Rock and Roll With Me.
All right, let's hear a little bit of that while you're talking.
Yeah. And it just, I'd never heard it before, and I liked it a lot. And I liked it a lot on the second listening. And it's a song I will tag in Spotify to come up once in a while for me. I just really liked it. Let's listen. So keep playing it, but drop the level a little bit maybe, and just, it starts off a little bit slow, but by the time it gets into sort of the crescendo of it, which he sustains for a long time, I just think it's a pretty great song and an example of that theatrical without being ponderous in this album.
Yeah, I agree with you. This crescendo's in a really great way. Actually, it's coming up right now, so I'll stop talking.
So, you've been to enough Broadway shows with me that feels like a Broadway number to me. It just does. You can just see the star on it with a spotlight on him,
totally
singing that with the cast behind him. You just can. It feels like a Broadway musical to me, which I like.
Yeah, I don't love this one. It does feel kind of stuck in its time a little bit as the 70s rock ballad. Maybe I just kind of have that whole era blended together as one big rock and roll ballad. But yeah, like you said, that show tune kind of feel, it's very big and bold, and it rocks pretty hard.
Well, me and the era are offended by your comments.
Yeah.
And you'll pay for that later. But what I want to hear is what you like on this album. I think I know, but go for it.
Yeah, so Rebel Rebel we mentioned, and the other one I kind of tagged was Big Brother was the one I was a big fan of. But before we get to that, just on the kind of show tune feel, I wanted to play a bit of 1984, because this song had a bit of a, it feels like, in the 80s there was kind of more of a, when you made a movie, someone always made like the song for the movie, you know what I mean, like the theme song.
Yep.
And this one has a very 80s movie theme song feel to it, even though it's from the 70s. It kind of has that, it has the little cop show guitar here at the beginning, and then I don't know exactly how to describe it.
Remember when we talked last week about how some of Teddy's arrangements sounded like 70s TV shows? This one too, big time.
Totally.
But when it gets into this part of the song, it just still feels like a Broadway show from that era to me. Mm-hmm. Like an Andrew Weber, Age of Aquarius kind of theatrical show, but for stage, not for screen.
Yeah, I can totally see that. It wasn't something I thought of, but when you kind of put that in my head, I can totally see it.
Yeah.
And then, the other one, like I mentioned, was Big Brother. This one's another one that starts off a little slow, but I found this one was the one that aged the least for me. It kind of stood up the most. I really like this trumpet part at the beginning. Let's just hear a little bit of it.
Don't talk of dust and roses, or should we powder our noses? Don't live for last year's capers. Oh, give me steel, give me steel, give me pulses unreal. We'll build a glass asylum.
I just had it written down as, it gets into it a little later in the song, but I found this to be the best use of his talents on this album. I don't love, you mentioned kind of the spoken word element of this. I just found that David Bowie didn't show off his singing enough in this. He kind of slips into half spoken word, half singing, which I'm not a huge fan of. But this one, he kind of lets loose.
And you hear it right now in that song.
Yeah, I just found this one, outside of Rebel Rebel, obviously, to be the one that I kind of most engaged me.
It's interesting you pick up on his, you say it holds up, and I hear that. And you talk about his talents. And a song I really didn't like is Sweet Thing. Mm. And as it merges, it's really one song when it goes Sweet Thing Candidate and Sweet Thing again in the reprise, as you noted off the top. And I don't like the songs. They sound like funeral dirges to me. Yeah. They're just in a minor key or something. I don't even know, but they're just dirges. Mm-hmm. But his voice on those songs, oh my goodness, what a great voice he's got, with great range. And he can modulate his voice just so flawlessly. He's really, really got an awesome voice.
Yeah, no doubt on, the vocal talent. Nobody's going to question David Bowie on singing, but I just found the pairing of the instrumentation and the vocals here on Big Brother to be really fantastic. The other song I kind of noted down was Diamond Dogs, and you mentioned you were a fan of it, but I just found that and We Are the Dead just go on way too long for what they're offering, for my taste.
Again, it's kind of like the guy in the corner at the party you don't want to talk to. He just talks a little too long about any one subject.
Yeah.
I'm with you on that, pal. There was a lot of that in this. And I heard exactly what you heard.
Yeah. If Diamond Dogs it's 6 minutes, if it was 3.5, I think it would be perfect.
Totally agree with that.
Right.
Nice.
Any other songs you wanted to point out?
Not really. I mean, the three that I love that I'd listen to again and again are Diamond Dogs, Rebel Rebel, and When You Rock and Roll With Me. I could listen to 1984 if someone put it on. I'd be happy with that. And I could live without the rest of side one, which is Sweet Thing, Candidate, and Sweet Thing. I'm good if I don't hear those again.
Yeah. Let's play Diamond Dogs while we're talking, because we haven't actually played it yet. Well, we move on to our next section, Influences, for which I have nothing written down, because this is a mystery to me, so I'll let you go on the influences point.
We have to find ways to start disagreeing, pal, because I was the same.
Yeah.
And I've got more connection, certainly, with this era, so you think I would hear some influences in this. You hear a little bit of the Rolling Stones in some of it, like just kind of that, like you could see or hear Mick Jagger singing some of these songs.
Yep.
For sure. But what's notable is the absence of influences. And I think that's really important, and why people treat Bowie so iconically, because I think he kind of carved out some new territory for himself. He came out of the British, invasion of the 60s, with the Who, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones as the big three of that British invasion. And you really can't hear a lot of any of them in his music. And he came out of the same era and really just went to a new part of the landscape and set up his own camp there. And I think that's maybe the genius of Bowie.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear a lot of hardcore David Bowie fans. They'll say he's one of the most unique artists of all time. And yeah, it's certainly rooted in its era and has the sound of its, the 70s rock sound, but it is unto its own. With some of the lyrical choices, and David Bowie's voice, like we mentioned, is unique in its own. So I couldn't really come up with anything that I could point to.
And maybe that's just the answer right there, that he wasn't influenced, and maybe that's why he's so important in sort of the pantheon of rock.
Right.
I did hear I can hear how he influenced some other acts, though. Okay. And certainly, Queen springs to mind for me in kind of that bigger than life, theatrical, Freddie Mercury consuming the spotlight, being a theatrical performer in a otherwise great band. And even some artists you're probably not familiar with, like, that don't get like Styx and maybe even Meatloaf, there's this kind of theatrical element to their music and albums that I can hear Bowie's influence on that, I think.
Right. Yeah, you're alone on that one. I know Meatloaf. Big fan of Bad Out of Hell, but I'll take your word for that section.
Right.
Let's move on to our fifth and final section here. Who would you recommend this album to?
Oh, man. If you're looking for the anchor album for the Bowie on Broadway that you're writing, this album is for you.
Your rock opera?
Your rock opera, and you're looking for that one toehold to write Bowie on Broadway, start here.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just had down not your first 70s rock album. I would, if you got a friend who comes to you and says, hey, I want to get into 70s rock, give me 2 or 3 albums I can start with. Diamond Dogs should not be one of the ones you start with. It should be something you kind of work into as far as 70s rock goes. But that's all I kind of got for Who For. I think it's pretty crowd pleasing. It's not super out there and super weird as far as the sound goes. There's this super rooted in classic rock sound. So it's not going to be foreign, but I wouldn't recommend it as your first toe dip into 70s rock.
And I don't think it's your first dipping of toe into David Bowie either. It's and that's kind of where I landed on this. It made me appreciate Bowie for sure more than I did before. As I said, he was kind of in my mind, a more style over substance guy, and that's gonna make people enraged that are Bowie fans. Yeah. But this album really made me appreciate his earlier stuff. And as I said, I think there's a nugget or two on probably every album he made. But I wouldn't recommend this album to anybody that off the top, as you noted.
Right. Rebel, recommend to everyone. Recommend to the world. But the whole album, not so much. There we go. Any final parting words on Diamond Dogs by David Bowie?
Very glad I listened to it. And probably won't dig it out again.
Right. Yeah, I'm
You?
on the exact same page.
Nice.
Yeah. There we go. That's
So-
Go for it.
Yeah, let's talk about you're up next, buddy. You got
Yep.
the next choice for album.
Well-
What's where are you going?
So, Teddy by Teddy Pendergrass, I think just played right into your hand, and that was a little too easy for you. And we stuck around in the 70s with your pick, and I've decided we've agreed a little too much, so I'm throwing you right out of your element. For our next album, we're going to 2011 with Kendrick Lamar's Good Kid, Mad City.
You are going to push me right out of my comfort zone with this one.
Yeah. We won't say too much on it right now, but it's not insanely crazy as far as its sound goes, but it's going to be very different from Diamond Dogs and Teddy Pendergrass.
I was really hoping this whole effort would just sort of stay in the 70s for a couple hundred albums.
Well, you've always got your pick after that, so there's chances.
True enough. Hey, I enjoyed doing this one. This was a fun one to do. I learned a lot.
Yeah. I'm really glad I listened to this. It's my first real experience with David Bowie, and maybe I'll be checking out a little more.
So, what I want you to do is play the last song on the album, as we'll leave it at that as we listen to it on the way out, because I think it's a good closing song. But I really enjoyed doing this again, buddy. Thanks a lot.
This was fantastic. Thanks for coming on.
I love you.
I love you too. That's it for the Intergenerational album project this week, and we will see you sometime within the next week or so. Here's Chant of the Ever-Circling Skeletal Family by David Bowie off his 1974 album, Diamond Dogs. Have a good week.
Brother!